It all started with a voice message, not just an ordinary one, but the kind that shatters the illusion of a perfect life. I wasn't snooping, nor was I trying to invade Emily's privacy. She'd simply left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, a careless mistake that would change everything. The familiar ping caught my ear while I was pouring wine for the two of us, a small routine we'd fallen into over the years after dinner. It was a quiet, unremarkable evening. Emily was in the living room, her laughter floating into the kitchen like a cheerful melody, the kind that usually made me smile. Then I heard the voice. Male. Confident. Smooth, with a teasing edge. Don't forget what you promised me last night, babe. You owe me. At first, my mind refused to process it. Surely, it was a wrong number, some kind of prank. But my body betrayed me, my hand froze mid-pour, the bottle tilting just enough to send a crimson stream spilling across the pristine white countertop. I barely registered the mess. My chest tightened as I played the message again, needing to hear it, though every word felt like a knife. The same tone. The same flirtation. The same gut-wrenching familiarity. I pressed play over and over, each time hoping the meaning might somehow change. It didn't. By the time Emily walked back into the kitchen, I was clutching her phone so tightly my fingers had gone numb. "What's taking so long?" she asked, her tone light and casual. Her gaze shifted to the spilled wine, her brow furrowing. "Wow, David, you okay? You're not usually this clumsy." She reached for her phone, but I moved faster, locking the screen and setting it down with deliberate calm. I forced myself to take a breath. "Just tired," I said, the lie tasting bitter. "It's been a long day." She shrugged, picking up her wine glass as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that burrowed deep inside me, an icy weight I couldn't shake. I didn't sleep that night. Emily, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. The next morning, she was out the door early, barely pausing to give me a hurried kiss. She said she was meeting a friend for brunch, and on any other day, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. But now, every move she made felt loaded, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. For the first time in my life, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I followed her. She didn't head to the cafe she'd mentioned. Instead, her car took her across town to a gym I'd never seen her mention before. I parked across the street, my pulse pounding so hard it drowned out my thoughts. I wanted to believe I was being ridiculous, paranoid even. Then I saw him. Tall. Broad shoulders. A confident, easy stride that made it clear he was used to being noticed. He walked up to Emily, and the way she greeted him left no room for interpretation. Her smile was brighter than it had been in months, her posture relaxed and open. She even brushed her hand against his arm as they talked. They didn't head into the gym, though. Instead, they strolled down the street together, slipping into a small diner. I could have charged in, made a scene right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed put, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Anger churned inside me, coiling tighter with every passing second. This wasn't just about catching her anymore. I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran. That evening, I played the part of the oblivious husband. I made dinner, cracked jokes, and even asked about her brunch plans. She lied so effortlessly, her words as smooth as the wine in her glass. "Oh, it was great," she said, barely looking up. "Amy says hi." Amy, her go-to excuse, her reliable cover. I didn't challenge her, not yet. Instead, I let her keep talking, digging herself deeper. She thought I was blind, that I didn't see the cracks spreading through our marriage. What she didn't realize was that I'd already decided where this was heading. Whatever we'd shared, whatever we'd built, it was done. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity, a calm resolve I hadn't felt in months. The game had started, and I wasn't about to sit back while Emily played me for a fool. But before I could make my move, I needed something undeniable. I needed proof. While Emily was in the shower, I saw my chance. Her phone sat on the nightstand, face down as always. This time, I wasn't interested in digging through her texts or voice messages, those could be too easily erased. Instead, I went straight to the photos. Emily was the type to keep everything on her phone meticulously organized. Her albums were neatly labeled, no stray files or random clutter. But one folder immediately caught my eye, work events. It didn't sit right with me. Her job didn't involve much travel or any kind of networking that would warrant photos from fancy locations. And yet, the album was full of images of hotel rooms, upscale dinners, and selfies with the same man I'd seen her meet at the diner. One picture made my stomach churn. It showed them seated by a cozy fireplace, drinks in hand, her head leaning against his shoulder. The timestamp? The same weekend she had told me she was on a girls' retreat with Amy. My heart pounded as I swiped through more photos, my hands trembling with each new discovery. Another shot, this one of Emily planting a kiss on his cheek, while he smirked straight into the camera. It felt like a physical blow. The sound of water shutting off jolted me back to the moment. I barely managed to lock her phone and set it back on the nightstand before she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, steam following her like a shadow. Morning, she greeted me, her smile as bright and casual as ever. "You're up early." I forced a weak smile in return. "Didn't sleep well," I mumbled. If she noticed anything off about my mood, she didn't let it show. That evening, I moved to the next step of my plan. I couldn't let her suspect anything, so I played the role of a loving, doting husband flawlessly. I cooked her favorite meal, opened a bottle of wine, and even brought up the trip I'd supposedly been planning for us. "I've been thinking," I said, swirling the wine in my glass like I was deep in thought. "We should take a little getaway, just the two of us. It'd be nice to have some time to reconnect." Her reaction was quick, though fleeting. For the briefest moment, guilt flickered across her face, but she smoothed it over with a laugh. "That sounds amazing," she replied. "But I've got a work thing next month. Maybe after that." "A work thing?" Her go-to excuse. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't surprised. The trip wasn't real, it was a trap, and she had walked right into it. Later that night, once Emily had fallen asleep, I took my investigation further. I logged into our shared bank account and started reviewing her credit card transactions. It didn't take long to uncover what I was looking for. Charges for fancy restaurants and boutique hotels I didn't recognize were listed as business expenses. Then, the smoking gun, a purchase from an upscale jewelry store, dated 3 weeks ago. That same week, she told me she was swamped with work and couldn't make it home for dinner. Every piece of evidence was falling into place, creating a picture I couldn't deny. As much as it hurt, I needed to know more. The next day, during my lunch break, I drove to the jewelry store. It was a small, high-end place, the kind where the staff probably knew every customer by name. A young woman greeted me warmly as I walked in. "Hi there. Looking for anything in particular today?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the charge from Emily's card. "I'm here about this transaction. I need to confirm what it was for." Her cheerful demeanor wavered slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Let me pull that up for you." A minute later, she returned with a file in hand. "That purchase was for a men's bracelet," she said, hesitating before adding, "engraved, actually." "What did the engraving say?" I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated again, clearly unsure whether she should tell me. Finally, she spoke. "It says, to D." "To D," I repeated, the words twisting in my gut like a knife. She nodded, looking apologetic. "That's all the information we have on file. Sorry." I forced a polite smile, thanked her, and walked out. My mind was racing, the name, or initial, D, looping endlessly in my thoughts. That night, Emily came home later than usual, but she was in high spirits. She practically glowed as she kissed me on the cheek and dropped her bag by the door. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Exhausting," she sighed dramatically, flopping onto the couch. "Work's been crazy lately." I nodded, masking my anger with a sympathetic expression, but all I could think about was that bracelet. To D. Who was D? The engraving had opened a new door in this unraveling mystery, but it wasn't enough. I needed to dig deeper. I needed to know who D was and just how far this betrayal went. Emily had certain routines, predictable in ways that played right into my hands. One of her habits was leaving her laptop open when she worked from home. She trusted that I found her dull reports too boring to bother with. She couldn't have been more wrong. The evening after my trip to the jewelry store, I waited until she'd gone to bed, her soft breathing signaling she was fast asleep. Quietly, I slipped into the living room where her laptop sat on the coffee table. It wasn't even locked, just in sleep mode. A quick tap on the trackpad brought the screen to life. Her email inbox was pristine, too pristine. She'd clearly been careful to delete anything that might raise suspicion. But people always overlook something, and sure enough, I found it. Her calendar. Friday night had an entry that caught my attention immediately. The location was a restaurant I'd never heard of, listed under a vague title, Meeting with D. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill diner either. It was a high-end spot, the kind of place where a reservation was a luxury booked months in advance. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The truth was within reach. The days until Friday seemed to drag and fly by all at once. When the evening finally arrived, Emily emerged from the bedroom dressed to kill. Her sleek black dress hugged her figure, her lips painted a bold red, her hair styled with perfect precision. "You look amazing," I said, forcing the words to sound natural. She gave me a sly smile. "Just trying to impress the clients," she replied smoothly before kissing me goodbye and heading out the door. The moment the door clicked shut, I grabbed my jacket and followed her. The restaurant was tucked into the heart of downtown, an elegant and intimate place where every table was softly lit by candlelight. I parked a block away, walking cautiously toward the entrance, keeping out of sight. Through the large windows, I scanned the dining room until I saw her. There she was, seated across from him. D. It was the same man from the diner and the gym. He leaned in close, his laugh easy, his hand resting possessively on hers across the table. Emily's face was one I hadn't seen in months, soft, radiant, and brimming with affection. I stood there, frozen. A storm of emotions crashed over me, anger, betrayal, humiliation. But beneath the chaos was a cold, unrelenting determination. This wasn't the moment for a dramatic confrontation. This was the moment to gather proof. I pulled out my phone, snapping a series of photos. My hands were steady, despite the turmoil raging inside me. Emily had been careless, but I wasn't going to be. When I was done, I turned and walked away. Confronting them now would accomplish nothing. I had another plan in mind. By the time Emily returned home later that night, I was sitting on the couch, waiting. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow casting long shadows across the walls. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension. "Oh, you're still up," she said lightly, setting her purse down as if everything was perfectly normal. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone even. "Thought we could have a chat." Her movement slowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before she recovered. "Sure," she said with a smile. "What's on your mind?" I gestured toward the chair across from me, and she hesitated briefly before sitting down, her posture cautious. "How was your meeting?" I asked casually, though my voice carried an edge. "Oh, you know, same old stuff," she said with a shrug, avoiding my gaze. "Nothing worth talking about." Her response was smooth, rehearsed, like she'd played this role 100 times. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto hers. "That's interesting," I said, my tone sharpening. "Because I stopped by that restaurant tonight. You know, the one where you were supposed to be meeting clients." Her face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks as panic flickered in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. Without a word, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table between us. The screen lit up with the photos, her and Dee at the table, laughing, holding hands, sharing a dessert. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice as cold and sharp as a blade. She stared at the images, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. When she finally found her voice, it wavered. "David, it's not what it looks like," she said weakly, her hands trembling. "Really?" I shot back, my tone icy. "Because it looks an awful lot like you're on a date, with someone who sure as hell isn't your husband." Emily shifted in her seat, her face a swirl of guilt and defiance. "All right, fine," she snapped, her tone defensive. "Yes, I had dinner with him. But it's not a big deal. We're just friends." I let out a bitter scoff, the sound cutting through the tension in the room. "Friends? Friends don't exchange engraved bracelets, Emily. Friends don't sneak around behind their spouse's back." Her jaw tightened as she crossed her arms. "So what, you've been spying on me now?" "Don't even try to flip this around on me," I fired back, my voice rising with anger. "You're the one lying. You're the one cheating." For a moment, the room went silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on both of us. Emily locked eyes with me, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "You want the truth," she snapped, her words slicing like a knife. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing him. But maybe if you weren't so damn boring, I wouldn't have needed to." Her words hit me like a slap across the face, but I refused to let her see how deeply they hurt. "You're unbelievable," I said, pushing myself to my feet, my hands balled into fists. "You think this is my fault? You're the one who tore this marriage apart." She stood too, her posture rigid and defiant. "Maybe this marriage was already broken, David." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I knew. Instead, I saw a stranger standing in her place. "This isn't over," I said quietly, my voice steady and cold. I turned toward the door, leaving her standing there. Her mocking voice followed me, laced with disdain. "Good luck figuring out what to do without me, David." She had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Emily thought she'd won, that I'd collapse under her smug arrogance and venomous words. But she didn't know the side of me that could be precise, methodical, and unrelenting. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. I started by assembling my arsenal, the photos, the bank statements, the receipts. Every lie she'd told, every betrayal, was neatly catalogued and documented. This wasn't just about exposing her, it was about leverage. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her choices. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed her to understand the consequences. That evening, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed lightly to herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like the perfect picture of a loving wife. I sat at the dining table, quietly watching her, my gaze unwavering. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said, not bothering to turn around. "I've been thinking," I replied, my tone calm. "About what?" she asked dismissively, her voice light and unconcerned. "About us," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And how we ended up here." She hesitated briefly but didn't turn to face me. "Oh, come on, David. Are you really still hung up on last night? I told you, It's not as bad as you're making it out to be. Not as bad, I repeated, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. Emily, you're having an affair. I think that qualifies as pretty bad. She slammed the knife onto the cutting board and spun around, her eyes blazing. Fine. Yes, I'm seeing someone else. But honestly, can you even blame me? Her words hung in the air, each one sharper than the last. Blame you? I said, standing slowly, keeping my tone icy. You're the one who turned our marriage into a farce. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms in exasperation. Oh, please spare me the pity act, David. You've been boring for years, predictable, safe. I needed something more. Her words cut deep, but I refused to show it. Instead, I remained composed. So, sneaking around and acting like a coward is your idea of more? Congratulations. You found exactly what you're looking for, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. She waved a dismissive hand, her tone dripping with contempt. You wouldn't understand. You're right, I said, stepping closer. I don't understand. But I will. Her confident demeanor faltered for the first time. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, her voice tinged with unease. You'll see, I replied, my tone calm yet filled with unspoken menace. In the days that followed, I played my part flawlessly. I acted subdued, almost defeated, letting her think she'd broken me. Her confidence grew, her smugness more evident with each passing day. But while she basked in her supposed victory, I was working behind the scenes, methodically putting my plan into motion. The first step in my plan was to rope in Amy. She wasn't just Emily's best friend, she was also the weak link in all of this. Amy had always been a talker, especially after a glass or two of wine, and I knew exactly how to use that to my advantage. I invited her over under the pretense of needing advice. She showed up curious, maybe even a little too eager to get caught up in the drama. I just don't know what to do, I said, pouring her another glass of wine. Emily says she's unhappy, but she won't tell me why. I just want to make things right. Amy hesitated, the wine loosening her guard. David, she trailed off, biting her lip nervously. What is it? I asked, leaning forward like a desperate man grasping for answers. It's not really my place, she mumbled, staring at the floor. Please, Amy, I said, my voice cracking just enough to sell the vulnerability. I need to know the truth. She sighed deeply, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with reluctant pity. Emily's been seeing someone else. I thought you already knew. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm, my expression neutral. Who is it? His name's Jason, she admitted hesitantly. It's been going on for a while. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, letting feigned disappointment seep into my voice. I didn't think it was my business, she said, her tone edged with guilt. I didn't want to get in the middle of things. Well, thanks for being honest now, I said, standing and heading into the kitchen under the guise of needing to collect myself. When Amy left, I finally had all the pieces I needed. The final step was straightforward: confront Emily in a way that left her no room for excuses or manipulation. And this time, I wouldn't be doing it alone. Finding Jason was easy. Emily's photos, receipts, and the clues she'd carelessly left behind were more than enough. I reached out to him, posing as a potential fitness client, and booked a session at the gym where he worked. When I arrived, he greeted me with the same confident smile I'd seen in those photos, completely oblivious to who I was. Jason, right? I said, shaking his hand firmly. Yeah, that's me, he replied with his usual swagger. I leaned in closer, tightening my grip just enough to make him notice. I'm David, I said evenly. Emily's husband. The color drained from his face, his smile vanishing in an instant. Let's have a chat, I said, motioning toward a quiet corner of the gym. By the time I left, the trap was set. Jason, rattled and visibly shaken, had agreed to meet Emily at our house the next evening. I convinced him I wasn't after revenge, just closure. He believed me. What he didn't know was that Emily wouldn't see him coming. Not yet. I spent that night preparing, laying out every piece of evidence like a prosecutor building a case. Photos, receipts, bank statements, they all sat neatly on the coffee table, ready to dismantle her lies. The next evening came heavy with anticipation. Emily sat in the living room, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, completely unaware of the storm I was about to bring down on her. She had a glass of wine in hand and wore her favorite oversized sweater, looking relaxed and carefree, as if nothing in the world could touch her. I could hardly wait to shatter that illusion. "Hey," she called out as I walked into the room. "What's for dinner?" I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the window and glanced out at the driveway. Right on time. A car pulled up, its headlights slicing through the fading light of dusk. Emily didn't notice at first, but the sound of a knock at the door made her sit up straight, her head snapping toward me. "Are we expecting someone?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "You could say that," I replied calmly, my voice steady. Before she could question me further, I walked to the door and opened it. There he was, Jason. He looked awkward, unsure, like a deer frozen in the headlights of an oncoming car. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside to let Jason enter. His hesitant, thanks echoed through the room, and that's when Emily's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her eyes went wide, her face losing all color as Jason stepped fully into view. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp and laced with panic. "This," I said, gesturing between them, "is the end of the charade." Jason glanced nervously between us, his confidence evaporating. Regret was written all over his face. "David, I thought you said." "I said I wanted closure," I interrupted, my gaze fixed on Emily. "And that's exactly what we're getting tonight." Emily shot up from the couch, her body tense and defensive. "David, this is ridiculous. Jason doesn't need to be here. This is between us." "Relax," I said, my voice cold and unflinching. "He won't be here long. But I figured he deserved to see what you've been hiding from both of us." I gestured toward the coffee table, where I'd arranged the evidence, the photos, the bank statements, and the receipts. Every betrayal, every lie was laid out in plain view. Emily's eyes darted to the table, then to Jason, and back to me. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, her voice rising. "This," I said, my tone cutting through her protests, "is proof that I'm not as stupid as you think I am." Panic flashed across her face before she masked it with indignation. She turned to Jason, her voice sharp. "You told him?" "Not exactly," I said, crossing my arms. "But he was a piece of the puzzle." Jason raised his hands as if to shield himself from the verbal crossfire. "Look, I didn't know it was going to turn into this. I thought you were getting a divorce or something." Emily spun to face him, her glare venomous. "You thought? Unbelievable. Unbelievable," I said, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's rich coming from you, Emily. You lied to me, snuck around, and now you're trying to make this his fault." Her fury shifted back to me, her expression hardening into something unrecognizable. "Oh, don't act like some innocent victim, David. You've been a boring, checked-out husband for years. I deserved better." I stepped closer, my voice low and seething with controlled anger. "If you wanted out, you should have said something. Instead, you turned our marriage into a joke." The room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing down like a storm cloud ready to break. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily smirked, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "You think you've won, don't you? Sitting here like some detective, piecing it all together. But guess what, David? You're still pathetic. All of this? She gestured toward the table dismissively. It doesn't change a damn thing. Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see the impact. I took a slow, steady breath, my voice calm but resolute. You're right, Emily. It doesn't change what you've done. But it does change what happens next. She raised an eyebrow, feigning indifference. Oh yeah? And what's that? I turned to Jason, who looked like he'd been praying for a way out since the moment he walked through the door. You can go now. You're not the issue anymore. Jason didn't need to be told twice. He muttered a quick, sorry, man, and bolted for the door, disappearing as quickly as he'd come. As the door clicked shut, I turned back to Emily. She stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed, her posture stiff, like a cornered animal. Her glare was defiant, but cracks were starting to show in her confidence. This is how it ends, Emily, I said, my voice steady and final. You. Alone. With no one left to lie to. Her smirk faltered, the bravado slipping away as panic crept into her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, I replied, my tone unwavering. Done being your doormat, your cover story, your excuse. You've burned everything we built, and now you get to live with the ashes. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her standing amidst the wreckage of her lies. Just before stepping out, I paused and glanced back one last time. You always said you deserved better, Emily, I said, my voice steady and resolute. I hope you find it. But it won't be with me. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, leaving her to face the wreckage of the life she had so carelessly destroyed. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions I'd just left behind. My heart pounded in my chest, my breaths coming quick and shallow, but I didn't look back. I wasn't sure where I was heading, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. Behind me, the house stood silent, a monument to everything that had gone wrong. I imagined Emily inside, pacing, fuming, or maybe even crying. But whatever she was doing, I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration breaking the stillness of the night. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Emily never let anyone else have the last word. But I wasn't ready to hear from her, not yet. Instead, I made a call of my own. The first person I reached out to was my best friend, Luke. Over the past year, we'd barely spoken. Emily had a way of monopolizing my time, of making me feel guilty for wanting a life outside of her. But now, I needed him. David? Luke answered groggily, his voice heavy with sleep. It's me, I said, my throat tight. Can you talk? Yeah, man. What's going on? For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of it all threatening to pin me down. But then, like a dam bursting, the whole story poured out, the affair, the lies, the confrontation. Everything. Holy crap, Luke said when I finally stopped. I always had my doubts about her, but I didn't think she'd stoop this low. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, I didn't think I'd be blind enough to miss it. Don't do that, Luke said firmly. You're not an idiot. You trusted her. That's what a husband's supposed to do. She's the one who threw it all away, not you. We talked for hours. The conversation meandered through anger, regret, and tentative thoughts about what came next. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter, as though I'd finally begun to untangle myself from the mess Emily had left behind. The days that followed were a blur of surreal moments. Emily called constantly at first, her messages swinging wildly from rage to guilt to manipulation. You're overreacting, David. We can fix this. Jason didn't mean anything, it was just a fling. You're going to throw everything away over one mistake. You're pathetic. I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I focused on myself. I started packing a bag, carefully sorting through what I wanted to take and what I was ready to leave behind. The house was ours on paper, but I didn't care. She could have it. The place felt tainted now, a graveyard for all the trust she'd buried. I spent one last night there, sitting alone on the couch with a drink in hand. The silence was oppressive, yet it was a welcome change from the suffocating tension that had filled the house for so long. The next morning, I took the final step. I called a lawyer. The meeting was efficient and professional. I laid everything out, the affair, the lies, the evidence I'd collected, and listened carefully as they explained my options. Divorce wouldn't be simple, it never is. But I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to take my life back. When I got back to the house, Emily was waiting for me at the door. "You didn't come home last night," she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. I didn't respond, brushing past her to grab the bag I'd packed earlier from the bedroom. "David, seriously? You're not even going to talk to me?" she called after me, her voice rising. "There's nothing left to say, Emily," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder and heading for the door. Her face twisted, caught somewhere between anger and desperation. "So that's it? You're just going to walk out?" "Yes," I said plainly. "Because, unlike you, I know when to walk away from something that's broken beyond repair." She followed me to the door, her voice trembling with frustration. "You're such a coward, running away because you can't handle the truth." I stopped in my tracks and turned to face her one last time. "No, Emily," I said evenly. "I'm walking away because I've finally seen the truth. And I'm done pretending that this," I gestured between us, "is anything worth saving." Her jaw tightened, and for a split second, I thought she might try to stop me. But she didn't. She just stood there, fists clenched at her sides, watching as I opened the door and stepped outside. I didn't look back. The road ahead was a question mark, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be long nights and difficult moments. But as I drove away from that house, leaving Emily and her lies behind, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. The fallout. Emily didn't let things go quietly. I didn't expect her to. 2 days after I moved out, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from her, long, scathing, and dripping with bitterness. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Running off and leaving me to deal with everything. Well, guess what, David? People are going to know the truth. You've always been the problem, not me. I'm not the bad guy here, and I won't let you make me out to be." I stared at the screen, a familiar mix of disbelief and exhaustion washing over me. She couldn't manipulate me anymore, so now she was turning her energy outward, aiming to dismantle my reputation instead. By that afternoon, the calls started rolling in: friends, coworkers, even distant relatives who hadn't reached out in years. "David, what's going on?" one of my old college buddies asked. "Emily's been all over social media, saying you abandoned her. She's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown." "Breakdown, huh?" I muttered, logging into Facebook for the first time in weeks. Sure enough, there it was, a flood of posts from Emily. Carefully curated photos of her looking somber and reflective, paired with captions like, "I gave him everything, and he just walked away. Some people don't realize what they have until it's gone." The comments were relentless, a mix of sympathy and judgment. "Stay strong, Emily. You deserve so much better. David sounds like a narcissist. You're better off without him." But there were cracks in her story, small but significant. A few brave voices were pushing back. "Didn't you have an affair? Maybe focus on accountability instead of playing the victim. We've seen Jason's statement, Emily. You're not fooling anyone." I didn't reply to any of it. My lawyer, Claire, had warned me this might happen. "She'll want to provoke you into reacting," Claire had said. "The best thing you can do is stay quiet. Let her spin herself into a corner. Staying quiet was harder than I expected. Watching her lies spread, knowing they were reaching people in our shared social circles, and beyond, was infuriating. For every person who questioned her narrative, there were two who didn't. The rumors began to snowball, and it wasn't just my reputation on the line anymore, it was my career, my friendships, and everything I'd spent years building. That night, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through the chaos Emily had unleashed, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Amy. "She's not stopping, David. She's telling people you were abusive, that you controlled her." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with rage. The accusation was as vile as it was false. I had never laid a hand on Emily, never raised my voice in anger except for the night I confronted her. Now she was weaponizing lies in the most damaging way possible, all to protect the crumbling facade she'd built. The next morning, I called Claire. "This has to stop," I said, my voice tight with frustration and exhaustion. "She's digging her own grave," Claire replied calmly, her voice measured. "The more lies she spins, the easier it becomes for us to prove she's unreliable." "This isn't just about the divorce anymore," I said, my frustration spilling over. "She's trying to ruin my life." Claire paused briefly before speaking again. "There's another option," she said. "We can file for a restraining order. It won't stop her social media antics, but it'll send a clear message that her behavior won't be tolerated. If she violates the terms, there will be legal consequences." "Do it," I said, not even needing to think about it. The restraining order was filed the very next day. Within hours, Emily was served. I braced myself for the fallout, knowing it would be explosive. I wasn't wrong. That evening, my phone rang. The caller wasn't Emily, it was her mother. "David, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp and impatient. I explained everything as calmly as I could, the affair, the lies, the smear campaign. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end before she sighed heavily. "I knew she was being reckless," she admitted, her tone weary, "but this? I don't know what's gotten into her, David. She's always had a temper, but this is different. She's trying to destroy me," I said bluntly. Her mother didn't argue. "I'll talk to her," she said, though her voice carried little conviction. "But don't expect miracles." The next day, the tide began to turn. News of the restraining order spread quickly, casting doubt over Emily's narrative. People who had once rallied around her began questioning her motives, wondering why she had taken things so far. Then Jason made his move. In a live video posted to his social media, his frustration boiled over as he addressed Emily directly. "Enough is enough," he said, his tone sharp and angry. "You lied to me, you lied to David, and now you're lying to everyone else. Stop dragging us down with you." The backlash was swift and brutal. People who had been Emily's staunchest defenders began turning on her. The comments under her posts shifted dramatically. "So Jason and David are both lying?" "Sure, Emily. This is pathetic. Own up to your mistakes. We've seen Jason's video. You're not fooling anyone." By the end of the week, Emily's carefully constructed image had crumbled. Her posts stopped, her so-called friends stopped defending her, and even Amy reached out to tell me Emily had cut her off. "She's isolating herself," Amy wrote. "I think she's finally realizing she's lost." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of peace. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Emily was never the type to accept defeat quietly. It happened weeks later, on a rainy Wednesday evening. The divorce proceedings were underway, the restraining order had kept her at bay, and her smear campaign had spectacularly backfired. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Then she showed up. I was sitting in my apartment, the soft hum of the TV playing in the background, when I heard the knock. It was sharp, insistent, and impossible to ignore. When I opened the door, there she was. Emily stood on the other side, drenched from the rain, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. She didn't look anything like the confident, composed woman I had once known. She looked desperate. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice firm, my hand gripping the edge of the door. "I just need to talk," she said, her voice trembling, barely steady. "Please, David. 5 minutes." Every instinct screamed at me to close the door, to walk away without a second thought. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of desperation that stopped me. With a sigh, I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. Emily stepped into the living room, her drenched clothes dripping onto the floor, clutching her purse tightly as though it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Say what you need to say," I said, crossing my arms and leaning against the wall. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape route. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and met my gaze. "I messed up," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I did. But you need to understand, I never meant for it to go this far." A bitter laugh escaped me as I shook my head. "You didn't mean for it to go this far. Emily, you torched our marriage, dragged my name through the mud, and tried to ruin me. What exactly did you mean to happen?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the briefest moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. "I was angry, okay," she said, her voice trembling. "I was scared. When you started pulling away, I felt like I was losing everything, and I made bad choices." "Bad choices?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Cheating for months, lying to my face, and launching a smear campaign isn't a bad choice, Emily. It's a series of decisions you made, again and again." She flinched but didn't look away. "I didn't know how to fix it," she said, her voice cracking. "And when you started fighting back, I panicked. I thought if I controlled the story, I could salvage something. But I was wrong. I see that now. It's too little, too late," I said coldly, my voice devoid of sympathy. Her tears spilled over as she took a hesitant step toward me. "David, I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose you." I stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. "You already lost me, Emily. The moment you decided to betray me, you let me go. This isn't something you can fix with a tearful apology." The room was filled with the rhythmic pounding of the rain against the windows as silence settled between us. For a moment, she simply stood there, her shoulders trembling. Finally, she nodded, her posture sagging in defeat. "I guess I deserve that," she said softly. Emily turned toward the door, but as her hand reached for the knob, she paused and glanced back at me. Her face was drawn, her voice a whisper. "For what it's worth," she said, "I did love you, David. I don't know how to be the person you deserved." I stared at her, a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and something unnameable churning inside me. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, my voice steady, devoid of warmth. She lingered for a second longer, then opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the echoes of what used to be.